Get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 19th gathering of Coping with COVID. Today is August 24th, and it is lovely to have you with us today. And for those of you watching the recording later, we're thinking of you and hoping you are doing well. This is the first week of school in my household, so we have lots of activity going on around here with the return to virtual learning. So for those of you in that situation, I hope it's going well. And for any of you that teach at the college level, I imagine you are getting ready to return to your classes as well. Mine start tomorrow, so I'm very excited to see the students and engage with them in this new virtual setting. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Elaine, and I am a CPA. My work is with creative individuals and organizations, and I am the luckiest CPA ever because I get to work with amazing groups all over the country and have these conversations all in support of an individual's creativity. Of course, everything we talk about is educational in nature and not intended to be tax, legal, or accounting advice. So with that in mind, what we're doing today is going over a few updates that have come out. There was an executive order signed a few weeks ago. You remember last time we talked, it was still a little unclear how that would apply. So we have some more details now, so we'll be going through that. There was also a pause to payroll tax contributions. So we'll talk about what that may or may not mean for those of you that have W-2 jobs. And then we'll highlight some mortgage news that came out at the end of last week that I find kind of interesting. As always, if you are listening live and you have additional questions, definitely drop them in the chat and I will answer them as we go. So you probably recall that both the House and the Senate have passed legislation that is almost a second round of COVID stimulus relief. The CARES Act passed many, many months ago, and we have now implemented that and exhausted many of those resources. And so the House and the Senate have each approved their own versions of a new bill. No progress has been made recently on reconciling the differences between those two bills, but we will, of course, keep watching it and let you know when that changes. You also probably remember that a few weeks ago, President Trump signed a handful of executive orders that did a variety of different things. So we'll be diving into some of those today now that we have some additional clarity on what those mean. So the one that's been getting the most attention has to do with this unemployment support that was enacted via executive order. So here's what's going on. You probably remember that the CARES Act introduced an extra $600 a week supplement to unemployment. Unemployment is still administered through the states, but the federal government had chipped in an extra $600 per person per week that was taking a whole lot of pressure off of a lot of individuals and households. Those additional $600 a week payments ended at the end of July. Of course, different versions of different legislation have them continuing in different ways, but we are in this limbo now where the additional payments have stopped. So President Trump signed an executive order that basically took some money from FEMA, our disaster assistance federal group, and it took some of that money that had already been apportioned and diverted it to fund a grant program that would go to states. The program is called the FEMA Lost Wages Supplemental Payment Assistance Program. And the way it works is states apply to receive these federal dollars in the form of a grant, and the states receive $300 per person on unemployment from the federal government, and then states add $100 of their own funds so that individuals on unemployment get an extra $400 per week. Now, President Trump could do this because it's not apportioning new dollars. Remember, that's what Congress does. But since these dollars existed in FEMA, there was a way to divert these assets into individual pockets. So it's a little complicated, as you can imagine, because states were required to create essentially a new program for this, and no one was really sure how long that might take. Some states were able to jump onto it very, very quickly, but it also is slightly more complicated, so it wasn't as simple as just flipping a switch and getting extra dollars. The other complication is that this is not just free money coming from the federal government, states also have to kick in $100. And as we know, state collections of tax revenues are down, property taxes are down and delayed in some shapes, sales taxes are down. So our states are kind of struggling when it comes to collecting dollars. So some states are trying to figure out if they have $100 per unemployed person to spare to add to the $300 that's coming from the federal government. The other complication with this program is that only individuals that are getting more than $100 per week in their state unemployment benefits are eligible for this extra pot of money. So many individuals who were employed part-time or whose benefits are at the lower end, say they're getting less than $100 per week from their state, they are not eligible for this additional $400 per week. So for some individuals, again, especially individuals who were working part-time or who maybe had lower bases on which to draw unemployment, they wouldn't be eligible for this particular relief program. The final complication is that the amount of dollars that were used from FEMA to fund this pot of grants is substantial, but it's maybe not as substantial as it needed to be. So most estimates have the total amount covering about 5 weeks of extra $300 per person payments, which is not a huge amount. The amounts were slated to be retroactive to August 1st. So that means we'd probably see this program end by the end of August or maybe the first week of September, which is rapidly approaching if you're watching the calendar. So that means this is just a stopgap until Congress figures out whether and if they're going to extend additional federal support to unemployment. So that's why this program is a little bit complicated. But 14 states have been accepted to participate in this program. I saw numbers from the Associated Press that another 4 states have applied, but they haven't been approved yet. No states have been rejected, so it seems like FEMA is being pretty open with how states are creating this program and how they're administering the dollars. We know South Dakota has said they will not be participating. The governor of South Dakota announced that about 80% of the lost jobs in South Dakota have been recovered, so they didn't think it was necessary. And Mississippi seems to have indicated that they will not be participating as well, although they may change their minds. The states that have been approved are Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, Idaho, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Michigan, Missouri, Montana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas, and Utah. Arizona has already begun making their payments. I believe this week, or maybe at the end of last week, individuals in Arizona started getting their extra $400, and other states will be following very quickly. The remaining states haven't really decided how they're going to approach this or if it's going to make sense for them. It wouldn't surprise me if we continue to see more states applying to participate. So we'll just keep an eye on it and stay tuned. So that's the unemployment supplement. Really good if you are currently on unemployment and live in a state that has applied to participate in this, because that means you'll be getting an extra $400 a week at some point, probably for about a 4-week period, maybe 5 weeks if the dollars stretch out. It's not so good for you if your unemployment benefit is less than $100 because you're not eligible. The other piece of a separate executive order that President Trump signed a few weeks ago was a pause in payroll tax collections. And this was kind of interesting because this mirrored something that President Obama had signed way back during the last Great Recession, that essentially put more dollars into people's pockets. And the way this works is you probably remember if you have a W-2 job, so you are an employee of someone else, when they pay you, they withhold 6.2% of your income to pay for your Social Security benefits. They also withhold a little bit for Medicare, and they may withhold additional amounts for your federal, state, and income taxes as well. But this 6.2% that they withhold for Social Security is interesting because you pay 6.2% and then your employer matches that payment. So it's 12.2% in total that goes to fund Social Security, but you only pay 6.2% of it, right? So this executive order basically said employers no longer have to withhold the 6.2% that employees pay. So what that would do in theory is make you feel like you were getting more money, because instead of having that amount withheld, you would get a larger paycheck from your W-2 employer. Employers are still responsible for paying their share. It's just the employee's portion that has been paused. But here's why that's kind of confusing. The way the order is written, this does not forgive that contribution. And that's a big distinction between this payroll tax holiday and the payroll tax holiday that happened way back in 2008 or 2009. In 2008 and 9, the payroll tax was forgiven. That means individuals just didn't pay into Social Security, but that was totally fine. They got to keep the extra dollars they collected or they earned as part of their paycheck. The way this executive order is written, it defers collection of the Social Security tax, but it doesn't forgive it. So a lot of employers were wondering if it actually made sense for them to not withhold this amount from employees if they were just going to have to collect it later. So there are still some big questions around this. I have yet to hear of a single major employer that has put this into place. Everybody's kind of waiting for guidance to confirm that this payroll tax holiday will be a fully forgiven payroll tax holiday, meaning employees won't have to pay this back at the end of the year or at some other point in the future. So that's why this one is still kind of a big question mark. Also, one thing to note, this particular deferral holiday, or whatever we're going to call it, only applies to those whose salaries are less than $104,000 per year. And as far as we can tell, it only applies to W-2 employees. It wouldn't affect your self-employment income tax, as best as we can tell right now. The other interesting thing that came up at the end of last week is some new mortgage numbers. You'll probably remember that the CARES Act banned foreclosures and evictions through the end of July. As of now, this provision has not been extended, and we know that the House bill and the Senate bill have different takes on what this looks like. We also know that the pause on foreclosures and evictions only applied to federal housing situations or federally guaranteed housing situations. So it wasn't blanket universally applied to everyone. What's new now is a number that came out at the end of last week. There's been an uptick or an increase in the number of mortgages that are delinquent. So right now, there are 2.25 million homes that have mortgages on them where the homeowners are more than 90 days delinquent in making those mortgage payments. Now, they're not in foreclosure yet. They're just in this sort of extreme delinquency, which many people who are watching the housing market are a little bit concerned about for a couple of reasons. Number one, people tend to prioritize their housing payments even when things are tight. So this many people being delinquent on their mortgages for 90 or more days means families might not be doing so well, and that might create a whole lot of foreclosures, which could sort of dampen the enthusiasm and vigor for the housing market right now. So that's kind of interesting to watch, and economists are paying attention to that. The other thing that I think this highlights is sort of the growing inequality between families who are barely scraping by and families who are doing okay. And I think that's another key thing to watch, especially right now at this moment in time. What's confusing about this, and this perhaps speaks to some of the inequality issues, is that sales of single-family homes are up nationwide. That's not super surprising because interest rates are still really, really low. And especially outside of major metropolitan areas, we've seen an uptick in the number of homes that are being purchased, perhaps as people step a smidge further away from some of our major metropolitan areas. And as they look at interest rates and say, you know what, it's a good time to do that. So if you couple that with the growing number of homes whose mortgages are 90 days or more delinquent, that creates a little bit of a tension and maybe some rising inequality. And that's definitely something to pay attention to. The other reason why this is maybe worth noticing or paying attention to is how it relates to the current unemployment figures. The chart here is unemployment through the end of July from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And you can see unemployment as of the end of July, or right now-ish, is about 10.2%. That's a high number. It's not as high as it was in April of this year, so it's moving in the right direction, but it is still considerably higher than it has historically been, as you can see on the chart over the past 2 years or so. So those are kind of the highlights of interesting developments that have come up over the past week. Again, that FEMA unemployment program is really interesting because 14 states have been approved to participate in that, which is wonderful. That means individuals in those states whose unemployment payment is more than $100 per week will be getting $400 extra in this FEMA benefit. $300 is coming from FEMA and $100 is coming from their state. And that will last for about a 4 or 5 week period. But remember, that is retroactive to August 1st. So we expect to see that kind of end at the end of August or early September. A handful of other states are still determining what it looks like to participate. So stay tuned to that. We also walked through the payroll tax pause and the confusion many employers are facing about whether or not it makes sense for them to stop withholding that Social Security tax from their employees. Again, if it becomes clear that this will be a true payroll tax holiday, I expect a lot of employers will move forward with that. But employers also don't want to put their employees in a position where they have to make up the tax later. And then we ended with some sad and depressing mortgage news. All of which is to say we are still in quite a bit of a holding pattern. We know that the House and the Senate have both passed legislation, and at some point they will get to reconciling that legislation, and then we'll have a little bit more clarity on what some of these programs look like going forward. I know many of you have PPP loans that you have fully expended by now. There is no forgiveness update as of now. We went through that forgiveness application a few weeks ago, so you should have everything kind of ready to go when the forgiveness application portal opens. No financial institutions, to the best of my knowledge, have opened up that forgiveness application yet, in part because some of the pending legislation has a blanket forgiveness for PPP loans of less than $150,000. So that might make your application for forgiveness even easier, depending on the size of your PPP loan. So we're still hanging out. We're still paying attention to the details. We are embracing this season of transition as we follow the agrarian calendar and think about what back to school looks like and going into the fall looks like, and all sorts of new interesting things. If you have additional questions, you can always send them to me. I wish you well. I hope you are doing well. My heart is going out to our friends on the Gulf Coast this week who are facing Hurricane Hurricanes Marco and Laura. I hope you are doing well. And we're also thinking about all of you in California and surrounding areas who are dealing with wildfires and the smoke from those wildfires. So take care of yourselves, keep doing good work, and I will look forward to seeing you next week, where hopefully we will have some more news to share. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.